Welcome to Space Month. It sounds so out there and outer spacey. But we're talking about the space both inside of your body and the space outside of your body when you're singing. So the first thing that comes to mind is the space in your pharynx. And the pharynx is the space above your vocal folds, anywhere in this tube that the sound resonates in all the way, including your mouth. So you have the space above your actual vocal folds in your air tube, and then that turns into your throat, and then that turns into the back of your mouth and the front of your mouth. And there's so many different things that change and shape this space. So don't overthink what your tongue is doing, but I do want you to notice what your tongue is doing, because when your tongue creates vowel sounds, when your tongue gets involved in any sort of way of you making sounds, it can either make this tube smaller or make it bigger. And some people, especially when they're reaching for higher notes, they can really scrunch up their tongue and it can create a smaller tube, which makes a different sound. So think about instruments. Like you have a trumpet, which has a very tiny tube and it makes a higher sound, and it also has a shorter length and it makes a higher sound. But a tuba, it's got a bigger thickness to it and it has a lot more tubing, a lot longer tube total, so it makes a lower sound. So if you think about your pharynx in that same way, if you shorten it by maybe moving your larynx up, which we do when we swallow, you can try that. Put your hand right here, right on the front of your neck, and you can swallow and feel that. And you can also make it longer. Same thing happens when we yawn. Try that. It moves it down. You're also on a yawn creating more space in the back of your throat. You're also lifting your soft palate. Your tongue is moving down. So it creates a bigger space and a lot of different dimensions in here. So I just want you to notice and start to think about all the different parts of this tube. The word tube sounds kind of weird and medical, but that's how I think of it, is this like big golden tube. Your whole system is a tube. So your breathing is part of this tube, right? It's the air that's going through it. And also your lungs have a tube that follows it up to the airway. So all of these parts of this tube create this one big long space for sound to be created. So I want you to think about, when you're singing, how are you able to open your tube a little more? Does that involve maybe paying attention to what your tongue is doing, maybe relaxing your tongue a little more, which is harder than it sounds, so it takes some practice, and not pushing it down in the other direction, just releasing. It'll feel almost like it's you're sticking it halfway out. The other part of this is the back of your mouth. So a lot of times in opera and classical training, we are taught to create more vertical space, especially in the back here. So a note that would normally be ah will turn into ah. A higher note might change from ah to ah. If you hear the resonation change, you hear the tone change a little bit. The pitch is the same, but you hear a little bit of different stuff in there. And you can try this yourself. Pause the video here and try to sing different notes with a different space, right? So you're feeling like if you feel like when you're singing high, you have a little bit of a squeaky sound, that could be because you are closing off your tube somewhere to make that sound higher and tighter, right? So pay attention to what's happening in the back of your mouth and your soft palate, which is the top of your mouth, which is the part right behind, like if you put your tongue up on your top of your mouth, you feel the hard palate, which is right behind your teeth. And then where it gets a little soft and squishy is your soft palate, the part that lifts up when you yawn. You feel that? That's also a way to change the space to make that space a little louder, the resonation space in here. So all of these factors contribute to the sounds that you're making, and it really makes a difference. As you just saw, I just was singing the same pitch, but totally different sounds came out when I changed the shape of things. The other thing I want you to think about is vowels. So when we have a particularly squeaky kind of high note and it happens to be on an E vowel, it can be really hard to find that space. So like, it sounds really tiny, right? But if I open up that E to a place that feels a little more vertically open than I usually would if I were just speaking an E, right? This is what my mouth looks like on a spoken E. E, but on a sung E, it would be more like, see, there's more space in there. It sounds a little different. I'm still saying E, I'm still thinking E, my tongue's doing the same thing, but I'm just creating a little extra space in there. And yes, this is kind of a more classical sound traditionally, but you can use it on things in pop music, like if you're singing at the top of your belt range, if you're feeling like, ooh, that feels a little crunchy, then you might want to play with the space in here, the vertical space in your vowels. So, for example, like an ooh is kind of a tight one here if you do it as you would when you're speaking, like you. But if you create a little more space, you can say you. Now I'm just keeping my back molars kind of just apart, a little more space in there. You. So if I have to sing that on a really high note, like you, it feels kind of like I have nowhere to go with it, right? But if I open up a little bit, you, I'm still thinking you, and my tongue is doing all the right things, but I gave it more space. And these muscles, these chewing muscles, can often be tight if these are also tight, and vice versa. These are really related to your vocal muscles, your extrinsic vocal muscles too. So opening this can often be a trigger for these muscles to release too. It also, I feel like it's just like a trumpet again, right? Like if you mute the trumpet, that sound is going to be a lot smaller. That's what mutes are for. And so if you're closing your mouth and having your teeth together, you, that sound doesn't really have anywhere to go. But if you open up, you get that full resonation of your mouth. That sound is resonating inside here. Yo! It's a bigger sound, a little more volume comes out. It sounds so much more relaxed and easy. So play with that. We've been talking about breathing a lot, so that's part of your tube. So make sure you're also breathing it and breathing in with that belly breath, releasing your low abs, and giving these sounds the fuel that they need, and then the space that they need, and see how that changes. And you can kind of play with those together, because singing is always just a mixture of air and muscle, which is what we've been talking about in these two places. So play with the fuel. You can slow down that fuel. You can have a teeny little airflow, but lots of space. Or you can have a big airflow, but a little space. Feel the compression that happens when that happens. But really, anatomy-wise, I want you to think of every part of your pharynx, every part of your tube. And so make sure you're not squeezing in here in your vocal muscles. Make sure your larynx is kind of in the general vicinity of where it is when you're speaking. And when you sing higher, it's going to lift up, and when you sing lower, it's going to go down a little bit. But what we don't want is like extreme versions of that, like or right. So pay attention to what's happening in there, what the length of your pharynx is doing with the space of your larynx, and then pay attention to your vowels as well. Pay attention to your tongue, and if your tongue is relaxed or pulling back and closing up that pharynx space. And then pay attention to your soft palate, pay attention to your chewing muscles, see what's happening in here. Just notice without judging, just notice all of these separate little things and see if you can kind of isolate each one of them. That's your homework for this week. Let me know how that feels. Any questions, please feel free to ask me. I will try and put up some diagrams along with this as well, so it's a little easier to see what I'm talking about instead of just guessing what these things are. But really, I just want you to think about the golden tube and keeping it open the whole way, the whole length of it. Happy singing, happy playing with your space, and we'll talk more next week.